Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. Thank you for your attention while this important legal information is reviewed. What you hear should not replace consultation with an attorney and should not be considered advice for your situation. On behalf of the Pilot Lawyer and your entire crew, it's our pleasure to have you aboard.
Welcome, aviators, to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast with us, the Eisen brothers at the Eisen Law Firm, where aviation law is all we do, nothing else. You're here for what we do best, navigating the FAA medical certification process for pilots and those who want to become pilots. And, of course, like we say around the office, if you don't laugh, you cry. And for the next 30 minutes, we hope to bring you the lighter side of what can otherwise be a frustrating process. So whether you're laughing at us or with us, join us, brothers, as we discuss the fascinating world of FAA medical certification. All right, jabrones, who's here? Count off.
Well, you got the big cheese. As we've listened to these podcasts, I now know there's some continuity that we're supposed to have. You are supposed to be the big cheese.
Yeah. I'm the little cheese.
No, you're Bozo.
Oh, that's right. I'm Bozo.
You're Bozo.
Bozo.
I'm not really sure where we've landed on me.
Well, we just try to pretend like you're not here. We're afraid of you around the office. And that's right, folks. We now have sound effects on our machine. And the folks at the podcast.
Well, listen. Don't be over here just randomly hitting buttons, okay?
Okay, Mix Master Mike. Hit me with something.
And that's what we're going to call you, the DJ.
I'm the MC.
Yeah.
MC.
What's the
Rock?
difference between an MC and a DJ?
How it's spelled. Give me one.
No, I think the badoop would have been more appropriate.
We'll get to that one later.
Okay.
You don't want to show all your cards at once, which brings me to this next nice transition.
That's a good segue.
Yeah,
Very good.
falsification. A place where you do want to show all your cards.
Okay. So tell us about it.
Today we're talking about intentional falsification of your application for Airman Medical Certification with the Federal Aviation Administration. What happens if you falsify your application for Airman Medical Certification with the FAA?
Do tell.
Well, pull out your wallet. You see that ATP certificate you got sitting there? Gone. Shred it. It's done, baby. If the FAA catches you falsifying your medical application, it's over. It's over.
In what way?
But can you fight it? Well, the FAA is going to come and they're going to revoke your ATP certificate. They're going to revoke your medical certificate. And then...
Is it just the ATP? You keep saying ATP.
Well, it could be any certificate. Private pilot certificate. Instrument
all you got?
rating. Commercial certificate. Any type of certificate. Your student pilot certificate. We've seen that one, baby.
What about your ratings?
All my ratings are gone, baby.
When your certificate is revoked, is there a difference between revocation and suspension?
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you what happens with a revocation. The FAA finds that you intentionally... What are you looking at?
I feel like you were waiting for me to hit a button over here.
You've hit this button.
I'm pushing buttons.
Hitting this button. All right. So if you have a revocation, the FAA says, hey, we're going to revoke all of your certificates. They're no longer good. It's as though they go away forever. You get to keep your experience, though. So if you have 100 hours, you get to keep your 100 hours. Typically, with an order of revocation, there's a 1-year cooling off period. So essentially, it's like, hey, listen, go sit over here for a year. And once you're done with that year period, you can go reapply for your certificate. So, for example, if you did have an ATP certificate, you got, 5,000 hours. After that year is completed, you get to reapply for your certificates utilizing that hour, but you start back as a student pilot. So you're a student pilot. You got to work your way back up to ATP and get all your type ratings as well. Now, a suspension is where they'd say, hey, listen, we're taking the certificate for, X days, 30 days, 50 days, whatever. And then when you're done with that, we'll give you your medical back and your certificates back. Well, they may not give you your medical back.
It just depends.
Erase that from your memory, listener.
Or should it have been?
Yeah, that's true. I know you hear that a lot in your personal life. That's right.
Yes.
Getting it. So anyhow, how do you get to... Let's test your fund of knowledge, should there be any.
Okay.
So how can you get to an intentional falsification? What happened?
So-
Let's say you're just going along fat, dumb, and happy, which we know you're fat and dumb.
Yep.
But what?
Is this a roast or just a podcast for pilots?
It's turned into that. So let's say you're just going along, and how do you get an intentional falsification action? Tell me about it.
Well, I'm so happy you asked this question. So, for the FAA to prove falsification, there are 3 elements that they must establish. This is known as the Hart v. McLucas test in the legal realm, if you will. And so the first element is that there must be a material question at play. Generally,
that's not right.
yeah.
It has to be a false statement.
No, there must be a
2.
material question, a false statement made with knowledge of its falsity. It's the 3 elements.
Yeah, you make a false statement in reference to material fact. And
I
then
like
you
to
have
think of
knowledge
it.
the
I like to
falsity.
think of it.
Well, you
as
like
a
to put 2 before 1.
No, I mean, no. I think 1 and 2 are interchangeable.
What?
It's just randomly hitting.
I meant to get the
colors over here. Listen. Okay, whether it's a false statement first or a material question second, either way, you still gotta have to have one of those 2 before you get to the knowledge.
I'll concede.
Okay, so we're talking about a material question. If we're talking about the FAA Form 8500-8 application for medical certificate, which is generally where we see the bulk of these falsification cases come from, then the case law pretty much says any question on the medical application is a material question. So it's almost like,
Why is that?
You tell me.
What? Why? Well, the NTSB has essentially said, hey, listen, all these questions on this application have the capability of influencing your aviation medical examiner's decision-making as to whether or not they should defer your application, issue their application or not. So the FAA's and the NTSB's position, as I understand it, is, hey, listen, we want to know about your foot fungus because the AME may factor that into his decision-making.
So now that we know that every
Or
question,
her decision-making.
whose ever decision it is, when
We know.
when you have the 8500, the application for Airman Medical Certificate, sitting on your desk, and you're looking at question 18M, Mike, history of mental disorders. Is that one that the FAA is going to take a good hard look at, you think?
They're going to land on you like a sumo on a piece of paper.
So Monday night for me. So anyhow, the FAA is going to look at 18M and say, okay, did he answer yes or no to this? Let's just say, for sake of argument, that the individual answered no. But let's also say that the individual had just come from a session with a psychiatrist that he's been going to for the last 5 years. And the psychiatrist has said, hey, you know what? I think you got anxiety. In fact, I'm going to diagnose you with anxiety. And so for the last 5 years, this individual has been going to his shrink. And now he's sitting there looking at question 18M on his 8500. Should I answer yes or should I answer no? And with a stroke of a pen, he checks the no box.
It's a stroke of a mouse.
It's a stroke of
a mouse.
it used to be a
button.
pen, whatever. The Med Express, the Consol electronic now. What do you want from me? You over here eyeballing.
I want a wah wah wah.
No, you don't get the wah wah.
I've noticed in the past few episodes, Alex, you've been awfully silent. And furthermore, I hope our listeners are listening to this podcast on the 1.5 speed because I feel like we talk really slow.
Well, every time I try to interject something, I get yelled at. So
Get it.
I don't know which one to hit.
The wah wah.
Anywho, so whether it's a stroke of a pen or a click of a button, no is the answer to 18M. Now, Mr. Practitioner of the Law, what is your thought process there with the Hart v. McLucas test?
Okay, here's what's going to happen. Hypothetically, let's say the FAA catches wind of these progress notes from the
would they?
psychiatrist.
I'll come back to that. Come on.
See?
Please let us put the cart before the horse. So let's say they catch wind of this, right? And so they come along and say, hey, listen, bucko, you should have been putting this anxiety diagnosis down on your question 18M. That's a mental health disorder. And you can say, oh, well, I didn't know. My doctor didn't provide me the records. I didn't know I was diagnosed with that. You can come up with all sorts of arguments. The problem here is that the FAA can use circumstantial evidence to establish your knowledge of the falsity. So was question 18M false?
Well, in this case, it was false because there's 5 years of established history with a psychiatrist for anxiety.
What makes it established?
The medical records.
So the medical records diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder. So therefore, a no response to 18M is, say it with me. Okay, I'll just say it because you guys just can't. False. So knowledge of the falsity. Well, how did I know? Well, that's where you get into the meat of an argument. Did you know or did you not know?
So you're saying that for the most part, unless it's just blatantly incorrect that the FAA is saying that you have something and there's no iota whatsoever of there being any history of you having gone to a psychiatrist or having had a diagnosis for anxiety, just there's nothing out there which would clearly be wrong for there to be a false statement. So you're saying then the meat of it becomes, what did you know at the time that you put down the false statement?
I lost you after you said the word meat.
Well,
I started salivating.
Yeah. No, that's that condition you have.
Oh, that's right.
So, so correct.
You know, I don't even think we need this laughter button. I think we supply enough laughter.
Right.
What did you say? My thought process here is that if I'm tracking your question, which I've now forgotten, the idea essentially is that, well, I didn't know that I had been diagnosed and so on, but it gets into a bigger problem. How did you not know? Were you being prescribed medication for the anxiety? Were you going to
say I was?
No, you didn't.
Well, then I'm not.
Well, you know what happens when you assume. I've fooled myself into thinking you were taking medication. So
I didn't say I was taking medication.
Are you or are you not taking medication?
For purposes of this fact pattern, I'm not taking medication.
okay, well,
why
why are you going to the psychiatrist? Why are you going to
I
the
like
psychiatrist?
talking to people.
Well,
Hang on.
it's a one-way street.
See, we're talking about falsification. He brought in a false statement.
So anyhow, the FAA is still going to say, well, you've seen this person, he's psychiatrist being diagnosed with anxiety or whatever, the circumstantial evidence suggests that you have the diagnosis. You should have known. Now, that's the thing. I don't see it as a should have known standard per se, but they sort of turn it into that. Like, well, hey, listen, you should have known because you've been going to see this psychiatrist every day or maybe not every day, but every week or whatever. I can't keep track of your fact pattern and how often you're going. But.
Well, listen, I don't think that's really the point. The point is there's 5 years of established history with having seen this psychiatrist who has diagnosed me with anxiety, and I haven't put it down on my 8500. So at that point, is there a material question at play? Absolutely. Any question on 8500 is material. Then the question is there a false statement? Well, yes, because I have a history of anxiety that's a diagnosis of anxiety, which would be a yes answer to 18M. I put no, so there's a false statement. Then the third question is, did I have knowledge of the falsity at the time that I answered no to 18M? And that's what you're saying is the crux of the argument, or where the defense can come in and maybe make some inroads to say, well, how are you going to prove that he had knowledge of the falsity? What is it that you're looking at, Mr. FAA, because it's your burden of proof. You have to prove.
Could be Mrs. FAA.
Yeah, whoever the warm body du jour is that's standing in front of us between our client and their certificates. Essentially, what's going on in your head, client, when you're answering this question?
There's case law that suggests that your subjective understanding of the question is relevant as well. So it's really fact intensive. What did you know? What did you not know? How did you know it? When did you know it? Why did you know it? And that's something that's very important to sort of ferret out. Is ferret out a nice term to use? What do you say?
I'll let it play.
Allow this one?
I'll allow
I'll
this.
allow you this courtesy.
Overruled. I don't even know what to say. So anyhow, it gets a little bit dicey though. We talk about DUIs. Now, I think in a DUI setting, you may have a little bit more leeway with respect to that false statement.
Has your FAA medical certificate been denied? Are you concerned you may not be able to get a medical certificate from the FAA? Are you at risk for FAA action for failing to report your medical history appropriately? Call the pilot lawyer at 1-855-FAA-1215 to discuss your options for getting the FAA to issue your medical certificate and get you flying. We are happy to evaluate your case and discuss with you a plan for presenting your case to the AME or the FAA. Aviation law is all we do, nothing else.
Question 18V essentially asks, are you arrested? Any driver's license action? Any convictions for motor vehicle actions and so on and so regarding alcohol or drugs and so on and so forth. Sometimes you could make the argument to say, I wasn't really arrested. And you could potentially impeach the idea that you were arrested through police reports and court records and so on and so forth. It's a little more fungible.
Fungible. Now you're just making stuff up.
It's a little more, it's potentially easier to say, I wasn't arrested and so on and so forth, because this police officer didn't say that I was arrested in his report or her report, or we're going to play that game. I mean, it could be anything. So
Their report.
correct. But the question then becomes still with a DUI, did I have knowledge of the falsity? Did I know I had been arrested? Sure, they handcuffed me, put me back in the squad car and took me down to the police department and put me in a cell. But did I know that I was arrested and so on? There have been cases where essentially you've been able to establish that, there was one case where, I've been arrested 2 times for
Unrelated DUIs.
Unrelated DUIs.
Like a battery or assault or
unrelated
something.
DUIs. And then I got my 3rd DUI. I didn't report it to the FAA. And then,
let's back up then. Let me let you establish your fact pattern.
Yeah, my fact pattern is I had 2 DUIs previously. I reported those to the FAA. I get the 3rd DUI. I didn't report that. The FAA finds out about it through the NDR check, National Driving Register. Correct.
You didn't know it last time. I don't expect you to know it now.
The NDR, and they say, what's the deal with this 3rd DUI? I'm going to revoke your ATP or whatever, your student pilot certificate.
I'm going to revoke all your certificates. It's not just...
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
They understand. And so the idea is that in this particular case, the guy came and said, I knew what it's like to get arrested for DUI because I've been arrested twice before. In this 3rd DUI,
this didn't have any of the trappings of an arrest.
Right. So you go in, the testimony essentially, I think, elicited by the attorney that handled that case was, hey, listen, I didn't know I had been arrested because I looked at all my papers, didn't see anything that said I was arrested. I was using my memory based off my other DUIs and so on. But, on this 3rd one, I just didn't think I'd been arrested.
So you didn't know that you were required to perform a field sobriety test?
Well, based off my knowledge of what an arrest was, per the question, I thought the honest answer was no. So this is an example, if you will, of a potential knowledge argument. It has to get a bit nuanced.
So it's very fact intensive.
Yeah. Let's go back to Bozo's question. What was it? The original question?
Oh, how is somebody going to find out about the falsity? Thank you. I'll be here for the rest of the podcast.
He thinks. Anyhow, cut his mic. Okay. All right. So anyhow, the idea about how do they find out about it? Well, let's take the mental health. Let's go back to your complicated and intricate example with mental health. How are they going to find out about that? They're not going to just spontaneously find out about it, are they? Probably not. The idea here is that they could find out about it through a few ways. There's hotline complaints. Somebody knows about it and says, hey, listen, I don't like Jim Bob down there at the airport. I know he's got that mental health. He's getting in his Corvette every week, going down to that psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist is saying he's got this anxiety. I think
it's psychiatrics.
Psychiatrists. Yeah. Well, that's how Ricky Ricardo says it. Psychiatrist. Don't talk about I Love Lucy. We're going to have to owe them some sort of gratuity. Where's the thing?
Keep going.
Okay. So I see him getting in his Corvette to go down to that psychiatrist, and he comes back all worried and fretted. So I'm going to give a call to the FAA because I see him getting in his turboprop and flying off all nervous and anxious.
I would be too if I were this guy.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
the kind of cheese you got to pull down to have the
Right.
Corvette and a
He's got a
turboprop.
prop.
Hey,
I mean,
jeez.
you know the guy's got
He
problems.
I got sweaty palms just for him.
Well, his monetary problems are not yours.
Ain't that the truth?
So that being said, where were we going with this?
I don't know.
Oh, yeah,
Hotline complaints.
hotline complaints. So I'm going to call the FAA. So the FAA sends this guy a letter and says, hey, we got a hotline complaint that you're going to the psychiatrist. Now send us all your records. Well, you don't have any choice at that point for the most part. They're going to say, send us your records. You got to send them your records.
What if I don't send him my records?
They're going to send you a failure to provide denial.
Listen
So-
to the first podcast.
So if I never send those records in, I'm never going to get a medical until such time as I
That's
send
right.
the records in, and then I'm going to just prove that I've been falsifying my medicals.
So there's a sticky situation.
What about like, hey, it's a small town. There's only one medical facility there. You know, I go there for my psychiatric needs, my mental health needs. But
That's a good example.
But then, lo and behold, something completely unrelated to my mental health happens. I have kidney stone, or I have a heart attack. Well, that's a whole other ball of wax. But let's say I have something else that I do tell the FAA about on my application.
Beautiful.
And now they ask for the records related to that. They're skimming through those
All right,
records.
they're looking at the records.
and they see, oh, this guy's got a history of anxiety. And they start looking at my past applications, and lo and behold,
See,
I
you
have
got a
not-
falsification issue there.
yeah.
How about this one? I've seen this one before. The airman goes into the AME's office. The AME happens to also be part of the conglomerate or whatever of where you're treated. And they say, hey, Jim Bob, I was just looking at your records here, and it appears as such that you haven't been reporting this problem that we've been treating you for. What are you going to do then? Then the AME starts lighting you up.
You ever
Telling the FAA.
you ever seen the little cartoon characters run out of a place and leave a trail of dust behind them?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would do.
Then you rush down and do an amendment to the FAA because you got to be honest with those folks.
Yeah, so I think that kind of is what the overall idea of this podcast is. We've managed to bury the lead so much that we'll have to do another podcast on amendments. So you can fix the falsifications of your past applications. You can come clean to the FAA. And we advocate here at the Eisen Law Firm, TM, that you always be honest with the FAA in your application. There's absolutely no reason to hide anything from them in this. The question's asked for something, you give them what it's asking for. Be truthful. I think that's the biggest takeaway. Sure, there might be some scrutiny that comes down your way for, whatever your medical history is, but your medical history is what it is. It's your history. So you need to be honest on the application.
Whether it's a personal statement for the FAA about your alcohol use or your history and so on, you got to be truthful.
Yeah. There is a difference, though. Well, I don't want to say a difference, but there is a fine line between being truthful and then being oversharing information that isn't relevant to the issue at
so
hand.
if they're talking about
Or
your
guessing as to what the answer. I mean,
yeah,
you
we've
need
seen
to-
people that are like, well, hey, I think I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Well, have you seen don't put that in a statement until you can verify that. I mean, again, be truthful, but let's get your records first and see what have you been. You might have only been diagnosed with adjustment disorder. There's a huge difference there. And then you're causing the FAA confusion because, well, now we need to see about this bipolar disorder that you've erroneously identified. You're causing the FAA problems. You're causing yourself problems. Verify the accuracy before you start saying things. Same as if you've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, don't tell me you've been diagnosed with adjustment disorder. It's a huge difference.
Let's briefly, before we end this podcast, talk about what you could expect if you haven't done an amendment to try and fix your past applications where you know or should have known that there was a false statement. And yet the FAA's found out about it and is coming asking questions. They're knocking on the door. I don't have a sound effect for that. That'll work.
Hello.
Oh, you again.
But let's say you've got a letter of investigation or you've gotten the hotline complaint letter. What do you do in those circumstances? Do you just rush right out there and start spilling your guts, or do you need to have a judicious and tempered approach?
Let me ask you this. When you're arrested, do you tell the cops everything that in a statement so that they can just use it against you? No. Instead, what you
Speak
do...
for yourself.
Instead, what you do is you provide an appropriate response to the investigation with the knowledge that what you say and what you do is going to be used against you in every possible capacity. So you need to get with an aviation attorney that handles these matters to competently and accurately discuss your strategy moving forward. There are some cases where you want to say, hey, listen, you got the wrong guy. There are other cases where it's, hey, listen, yeah, I did this. There are other cases where you just don't say anything.
Just kind of depends on the facts and circumstances of what's playing out.
I'd like to bring up a point here. This sounds awfully legal and not very medical.
Yeah, then why are you talking?
I'm just saying. Whoa.
You're talking to my guy all wrong. It's the wrong tone.
Come on.
For the listener, Christopher's been practicing that little line for the past, I would say, 15 days.
Oh, minimum.
Minimums.
Anywho, so you get a letter of investigation in the mail. Someone's from the FAA is wanting to talk to you about your past applications. Let's say you get an aviation attorney involved. Not really much happens in that regard. It doesn't go, there's no traction being gained in terms of getting the investigation to go away, right? What can you expect next? What's the next step?
Let's say they say, hey, we're moving full steam ahead with this. You'll get an order of revocation in the mail. Let's say they go full Monty here, which they typically do is almost always be an order of revocation. Typically is an emergency order of revocation. Your certificates are effectively revoked immediately. You have to send those into the FAA attorney.
That's on an emergency order revocation.
Right.
If it's a non-emergency order revocation, just a regular order revocation.
But you need to respond to the order as soon as possible and in the appropriate timeframes, or else you'll potentially waive your opportunity to appeal or to take advantage of due process privileges. So in that capacity, you need to call an attorney.
Yeah. At that point, you need to file
I just
an
got
appeal.
in my Corvette and I drove on down to that attorney's office.
What was their name?
The Eisen Law Firm.
And then when I realized they were a bunch of clowns, I went elsewhere. Just kidding. We got a lot of great clients out there that love us. Give us a round of applause. I see that we're turning base to final with a crowd of cheering people in the back. Alex, can you
They're
give
just
us
happy to get off this ride.
Can you give us a rundown of what we've talked about? In
Give me three examples. Give me three examples of falsification.
Furthermore, I want to give a shout out to our mom and dad who listen to this podcast regularly. We love you.
When I look at the metrics on this podcast, this is more of what I hear in my mind.
Well, everybody, we talked about intentional falsification of your FAA medical application. Jeez.
We're going to have to restart the whole thing.
Oh,
you ruined the last 10 seconds of it with your...
Hey, editing people, just take out everything that Alex ever says.
Yours.
Wait.
Don't actually. This is the only voice I have. Well, you've logged another uneventful half hour listening to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. And even though our wives deny they know us in public, we're the Eisen brothers at the Eisen Law Firm. See you next time.
God willing.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.